Welcome. We're so glad you're here with us to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the filing of the historic Onondaga Land Rights Action. My name is Andy Major. I'm here as an organizer with Neighbors of the Onondaga Nation, which is part of the Syracuse Peace Council. The organizers of tonight's events, in addition to Noon, are the American Indian Law Alliance and the Indigenous Values Initiative. It's timely for us to gather tonight as efforts by the federal government increase to bury key aspects of the history of this country, including the attempted genocide and the theft of land, which are so fundamental to the development of the United States. And as efforts grow to ban our collective work to seek justice and to repair past harms. But we will not be silenced, right? That sounded a little too silent. We will not be silenced. Tonight's event builds on two previous series that were held primarily here at Syracuse Stage, the first in 2006, 2007, shortly after the Onondaga filed their land rights action, and as part of the broader efforts to educate people in the community about what the Onondaga were seeking and about the responsibility of the rest of us to work with them to seek justice and a sustainable future for all in this region and across the earth. Tonight is also a teaser for a new series that's going to start in September and run through the academic year of similar programs. So keep your eyes out for more information about that. I also want to acknowledge that we're in the middle of the month of Ramadan, so our Muslim sisters and brothers and non-binary siblings are likely fasting now, and perhaps if there's Muslim folks here, they'll be here during the time when they would break their fast. So we welcome you and want to respect this is a holy time for you. After the program, we hope you'll join us in the lobby for some food and to get to know one another, to check out the wonderful crafts from Haudenosaunee craftspeople, as well as the information tables from the various organizations. And one of those, the Noon table, has postcards as part of a campaign to push Onondaga County to give land back to the Onondaga Nation on Maple Bay along Onondaga Lake as part of this broad ongoing effort at repairing the past harms and seeking justice together. So, and if you're interested in that, you'll see these flyers with a big QR code. Please go ahead and scan that to see how you can get involved and get more information from the various sponsoring organizations. So my last task is to welcome Tadadaho Sid Hill, who's going to offer a brief Thanksgiving address to begin our evening tonight. Thank you, Sid.
So this is just a little sample of the Onondaga language. We do our, what we call words before our L, so open address to Thanksgiving. We just acknowledge all the things that the Creator has put down for us so we could walk peaceably around earth. And we start out with just thanking the people that are here, that everybody is well. And we go through a series of through the plants and animals and their leaders, giving thanks to them, acknowledging them. And as we work our way up into the sky world, we thank the thunders and the sun, the moon, and all the duties that they do. And what we call our four protectors who watch about as we walk about on earth. And we also acknowledge our last message from the Creator when Skanyatai of Handsome Lake brought that message to our people. And this main message was, how do we keep, as a people, with all the things that our white brother brought to us, how do we maintain who we are with our language, our culture, our songs, our dances, all those things. So he gave us a way to keep going, and so we would know who we are, and our children would know who they are. So we acknowledge Skanyadayo, and last we acknowledge the Creator and all the things that He's given to us. So it kind of, we do this a lot of in all our ceremonies, when we have meetings, big and small, gatherings like this. It gives you kind of a sense of where we are in the world. A lot of our elders would say we're just visitors here. It's up to us to be a good visitor. And but with that, I'd just like to turn it back over to where to go. And over here, Phil. Okay. Thank you. Now,
Yeah. So probably a month ago, I ran into Andy Major. I said, Andy, can you believe it's been 20 years? So from that short conversation, we hatched this plan of doing another speaker series. My name is Phil Arnold. I'm professor of religion, Native American Indigenous Studies, and the Center for Global Indigenous Cultures and Environmental Justice at Syracuse University. I'm also, I have to read because I forget, I'm the founding director of the Scano Great Law Peace Center and the president of Indigenous Values Initiative. So as Andy was saying, we're in the midst of a kind of deep crisis right now. I'm convinced, and I'm trying to convince my students, that it is urgent that we return the lands to Indigenous peoples, not just for them, but for all of us, so that we can have a more viable future. And I'm gratified to see so many people here, so many people I've known for a long time, and also new faces. So we are going to attempt to do a couple of things tonight. First, commemorate the historic Land Rights Action, to try to get an update of where we are with that action, and also to introduce people who might be new to the Haudenosaunee and to being in Onondaga Nation territory, the importance of what it means to be living in their lands. I also have to thank a lot of other people on our planning committee, Jake Bork-Edwards, Sandy Bigtree, Betty Lyons of the American Indian Law Alliance, and I really want to give a shout out to Andy Major, who has been a tireless advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples and the Onondaga Nation, and steering the neighbors of the Onondaga Nation. Thanks also to Missy and Patsy and Adam, who have helped set this up, Raji as well. I wanted to start with this, how the Land Rights Action begins, as an introductory paragraph. This is what was filed legally 20 years ago, and why it's unique in the world. The Onondaga people wish to bring about a healing between themselves and all others who live in this region that has been the homeland of the Onondaga Nation since the dawn of time. The nation and its people have a unique spiritual, cultural, and historic relationship with the land, which is embodied in the Great Law of Peace. This relationship goes far beyond federal and state legal concepts of ownership, possession, or other legal rights. The people are one with the land and consider themselves stewards of it. It is the duty of the nation's leaders to work for a healing of this land, to protect it, and to pass it on to future generations. The Onondaga Nation brings this action on behalf of its people in the hope that it may hasten the process of reconciliation and bring lasting peace, justice, and respect among all who inhabit this area. So it's my honor to introduce the three speakers for tonight. I'll introduce the first speaker, Jake Edwards, Onondaga Eel Clan, is a citizen of the Onondaga Nation. He served on the Chief's Council for over 25 years and worked on behalf of the Haudenosaunee Grand Council. His work includes diplomatic work at the United Nations. He is a board member of the Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples and a board member for the Indigenous Values Initiative. Jake is one of the primary voices leading the 400th anniversary of the Two-Row Wampum campaign, in which people in canoes paddled on waterways from the Onondaga Nation territory to the United Nations in New York City, teaching people at stops along the way. He continues his educational work wherever he is needed. And please give a round of applause for Jake Edwards.
Haiwhagai'i, Haiwhagai'i nia giasta, Onondaga tanit dan anga. And again, I don't know if it's my voice or this microphone. My English name, I go by Jake Edwards. My real name, Haiwhagai'i. Translate it later. A translation of Onondaga is one of the things that we talk about throughout our contact with the Europeans who were lost at sea. And to understand the massive destruction that occurred from the very beginning, there's language barriers that hold us back from making this place back to peace and contentment as we walk about, as were the original instructions for our peoples of Turtle Island. And so we kindly and respectfully put our minds together and give a great gratitude to our Mother, the Earth, who is still carrying on her duties. And so that way we let it be that way in our minds. And so part of the translation that Taradaho spoke of to the English words, he mentioned that you got some Onondaga words in your ears, and he gave you a brief translation of the Ganohanyu, the Thanksgiving address. Well, we're living in a time frame now by the clock. We got minutes to speak and address and reiterate some of the history that, just to give you a time frame of this Thanksgiving address, sometimes the speakers can go for 45 minutes to an hour explaining in fine detail of what we're to be grateful for as we walk about here on earth. And like he said, it's starting out with the people that you're well enough to attend here, and then on to Mother Earth and her responsibilities that she's still carrying on today, and on to the plant life, and it mentions all the leaders of the plant lives, the sustenance of life, Junhekwi, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. The strawberries are the leader of the berries, and it mentioned the berries and their responsibilities that they're still carrying on. And it talks about the woods, the medicines, the leaders of the medicines, the leaders of the forest, of the woods, the maple. And to get into great detail of this, we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude that what work they were instructed to do is still carrying on so that we can be at peace and contentment as we walk about here on Mother Earth. So we let it be that way in our minds. And so when we talk about this program here is going to be a 2-hour sit-down and discussion. The opening address with the Ganohenyo and the closing address with the Ganohenyo is take about 1.5 hours of it. So we can think in our minds and in our hearts of what we're grateful for, and that it's still here for us to carry on. And it's our responsibility, like he mentioned, each and every one of us. You heard Phil speak about the responsibilities of the leadership, and that this land should be pristine for the next generations to come. And it's each and every one of our responsibilities to carry that on. And there's a lot of history that belongs in this kind of discussion, and we don't have the clock on the wall to tell us that we can get through that. Because when we talk about the forming of the Haudenosaunee as one, that could take up to 8 to 10 days. And so we don't have that kind of time frame. We got 25 minutes to condense 500 years of history, of contact with the colonizers, with the new people to this world that we know. But prior to that, we have still to put in there over 1,000 years of how we came about and the instructions that were given to us, so that we can share with open hands, open heart, and open mind to anybody who follows the white roots of peace that grow in all 4 directions. And anybody's welcome to follow them roots to the great white pine tree, Gainesat. And so when you look around, you see our flag of the Haudenosaunee. When we talk to people that's not Haudenosaunee, we mention it as Haudenosaunee. At home, when we're talking to our people in council or in ceremony or whenever we use that term, it's Gwanoshaunee, because we're including ourselves to who we're speaking to. And so others would reference us as Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, or Six Nations, or Savage. How can 5 savage nations live so far apart from each other, be governed under one government, was the question of the new colonizers. And they wanted to know. This is really skipping around here. We got a short time to explain a long life. And to just put it in short terms is we're still here and we're not going anywheres. And we're still going to educate, because that's our responsibility to share this message of peace for those that are walking about here on Mother Earth in our house. Our house is the woods. Our walls are the trees, the forest. Our floor is Mother Earth. The sky is our ceiling. And we welcome people to our home. And sometimes, well, as you guys know, guests, visitors, sometimes stay too long. And like Taradaho had mentioned, we had a message come to us a couple 100 years ago. And in that message, along with prophecies and how these people conduct themselves, is we're not to follow that. We're to remind our people we have our ways and to carry on our ways, in which we do. Because there's quite an influence. When you're outnumbered with a plan. So some of our ceremonies and some of our doings in our culture become secret. because we became surrounded, so we have to hide. Like we did in 1779. General Washington gave orders to destroy our villages and our food sources and make it very uncomfortable for us to be here and to force us away from our homelands where our ancestors of thousands and thousands of years lay in the ground. Well, he did destroy our villages, burned our crops. We call it the Sullivan-Clinton campaign. Prior to that, when they asked me to speak up here, I was wondering, what am I going to say? I got a short time to speak about a long happenings. And so I'm going to jump around a bit like that, and I'll try to reconnect back to the original instructions at the beginning. And sometimes it's hard to do. Like I say, it could take 8 to 10 days. Of course, when we sit for 8 to 10 days and listen, like the people here tonight, in silence to the speaker. When the speaker stands up, the speaker has the floor, and you listen. And the children are taught to not play with their whatever they have, because it might drop on the floor. And so when a speaker's speaking and something does drop on the floor, like a piece of wood to a bench, that means somebody has something very important to add to, and he's asking for attention. And then he'll ask to speak. And sometimes the speaker will say, yeah. And sometimes they'll let him. And so these were shared also with how we conduct ourselves as 5 such savage nations living so far apart from each other, yet govern under one government. And so we shared this information, and we shared it more than once. And we had more than one translators. And some of them were translating in a different tone of what was being spoken, because some of the translators were deep-hearted missionaries carrying their manifest destiny plans along with the doctrine of discovery. And so they were not honest translators. And they found something that weakened our people in such a way that it was advantageous for them. And they brought their rum, their whiskey, their mind changer. That's what we call it. They got neguhadeños. You got 2 minds going, it's like this. And you guys will recognize that term when you go like this, right? But that's the same thing. You get a bottle of whiskey in your belly, and that's what your mind is doing right there, trying to sort it out and get rid of it, just as soon as you take a swig. So this was a big influence on our people and on our young people. So when you look at when they saw the effects of that to how we conduct our meetings and how they persuade, and that's what when you look at the history, the archives of, just say, New York State, before they were a state, and after, some of the biggest commodities to bring to a negotiation for land, it wasn't beef and food, it was whiskey and rum. And there was a battle between them, people that produced it. But that's all on another chapter of what went on and this deceiving actions of the colonizers that come into our home. And so they took advantage. I got to open my computer. like I said, we'll be skipping around a bit because of the time frame. But here is our identity. Kwanoshoni, Hodinoshoni. When they talk about Hodinoshoni flag, it was a lacrosse team that helped develop that. When we got into somewhere in the early 80s, when we were playing in the World Games, lacrosse. I think it was in Los Angeles. And all the nations that were involved had their flags up all across with their teams. And we didn't have one. We had a staff with eagle feathers on it. And they asked that we put a flag up, and our young players, our young men were saying, well, we don't need a flag, we know who we are. I said, well, you're playing with the world here. They don't know who you are. So they got the team together and they said, we got to come up with some kind of symbol to recognize us. And they had some artists, fine artworking people on that lacrosse team, and then with the travelers that came with them. And they came up with a few different designs, and they couldn't settle on it because they were all nice. And then some young man said, what about this here? He said, this is who we are. So they quickly put together, found a place that could put a flag together, and that's where you see our flag now. This has always been us for over 1,000 years. But you see it as a flag now because of the World Games in lacrosse over in Los Angeles, I believe it was, in the early 80s. And so from the east, each one of our nations, prior to the unity to become one, were at battles with each other. We were fighting each other. We thought we were entertaining the Creator at the time because we were so good at what we were doing to each other. And Peacemaker brought a message to us. Creator sent a message directly to us, looking for the most fierce of each village, of each fire, and united us and shared with us the Gaina Satgona, the great law of peace. The great law of peace was a reminder of our original instructions. Because we were all of one people at a time before we broke off into different factions of struggle as the villages got crowded. And so we spread apart and then we started battling each other. So from the east is the Mohawk Nation. And they have their fire. And coming a little bit in is the Oneida Nation. Onondaga, fire keepers. Kanaktakwenioke is the main seat. You'd look at Onondaga as how you would look at the United States, and these are all states in Washington, D.C. And we'll get into how they copied our democracy to help their people get along, because they weren't getting along either. They had 13 colonies trying to run each other, and neither of them could agree on anything. And so a little bit further to the west is the Cayuga Nation, and then the western door, the keepers of the western door, is the Seneca Nation. And so normally you'd go through this all in the language and explaining their fires, as each nation has a fire, a council fire. It's understood that way. It's understood that way right directly to the human being, that each and every one of us as individuals have our own fire. And we have the responsibility to tend to our fire, because we all know well what happens when our fire goes out. And that's another part of that's in the law, is the condolences and how we work together as families, as clans. But that's a whole nother series of discussion. that we're not too sure that we would share that kind of information, because even this information hasn't been shared right up until the 70s, and we were keeping it to ourselves. We started getting some support we were fighting the state, trying to take some more of our land on Route 81 lane expansion. They wanted to widen the highway, and our leaders objected to it, and our people were right there to support that objection. And a lot of people from Syracuse, a bunch of students from SU came out in support of Onondaga Nation to stop New York State from taking more land, in which we won. And they didn't get that lane changed or widened. But that's some of the history of the wrongs that's been happening to us since we've met. And when we met, there was a lot of people that were friends. There was a lot of people looking out for what's right and trying to convince their colleagues on how to deal with us. New York State wasn't one of them, but some of the people within were. And so when you look at this land rights action that we put in 2005, and when the words you heard, the opening statement of our case, we weren't claiming the land. It's already ours. You don't claim something that's yours. We were asking the courts for clarification that the state and the United States had violated their own laws, violated our laws, violated the Constitution, which, by the way, what you're looking at is the first draft of the United States' Constitution. What they learned from our teachings, they modified a little bit. They modified it a little bit too much because they got a lot of things wrong. But they still have the concept of it. One of the main things that they got wrong was how to choose leadership. And in our teachings, and in the democracy of the Haudenosaunee, it's our mothers who choose the leaders. It's the women that choose the leaders. And so that's a very powerful part of democracy to leave out. Especially when you look at what there's so much, you guys, that to skip around, and I don't want to leave anything out, and I go back to the beginning of time. What we're here for is a short time. I see a lot of elders, see some young people, I see a lot of elders, and it reminded me of one of my leaders one day we were going to a ceremony in Tonawanda, and he asked the question, because people pass away, and there's been a few at that time, and he asked the question, he goes, well, when we get there, so-and-so is gone, so-and-so's got to start naming off people who had passed away, and he goes, who are the elders we got to speak to when we get there? His wife looked at him and said, well, look in the mirror. Because he was getting old too. He's becoming. So the encouragement that I share with the youngsters here is don't put it off visiting your elders. It's very crucial to keep the continuity of their teachings into your mind, heart, and body so that we remain as one. And so there's oral teachings that we hear about all the time. We hear that's oral teachings. Well, oral teachings is very repetitive, as with our ceremonies, as with our Thanksgiving address. It's very repetitive. over and over again. And so the youngsters here have to visit the elders so that they can repeat what they've learned over the years, and the elders still on earth walking about in peace and contentment can help direct where they're not right or where they left something out. Because these teachings that we carry, the wisdom of our ancestors that strung these beads together, with the procedures and the protocols, the ceremonial, the social, the foods, the planting, the gathering, the ceremony for giving thanks for each one, the maple tree, the leader, ceremonies for that, how to speak and how to listen, because the forest is always talking. Today, with modern technology, they say you're always, or what they call them, older brothers always watching you. Well, our teachings had people watching us all the time, way before the apple, way before the blackberry. And so we understand that, because when you listen to the forest, you become part of it. That's your home. That's our home. That's what's in here. That's what's woven in here. There's no rules in here to say how you have to save the environment. The rules that are talking about saving it for the next generation are the same rules that you have to protect your own fire. Because when that goes out and you don't pay attention to the rules of life, the rules of nature, we all can witness now what that's about. About 20 years ago, we filed a land rights action asking for a declaratory judgment that these government entities violated our human rights. And it was denied. Just like in 1922 when New York State wanted, excuse me, they wanted to solve their Indian problem, New York State's Indian problem. In 1922, they commissioned Whipple. What was his first name? Mr. Whipple. He was from Potsdam. He was a state senator. And they summoned him, they commissioned him to do a report on New York State's Indian problem because Washington couldn't get rid of us on his Sullivan's Clinton campaign. Because, you know, you think about your house and you know all the little hiding spots you want to hide something. Well, when they came through our house, we already know the hiding spots. And we went to them in a hurry because they were out to get rid of us. And so in that Whipple report, which was 1,400 pages or so, 1,500 pages. He completed his report and turned it back over to New York State. But in his findings was New York State was wrong. The land that you have in question belongs to the Haudenosaunee, and they refused to accept his report. There's no justice. When you look at the Justice Department, we used to hear our people talk about it. How are you going to get justice? You're talking to a, how can I say it kindly? I can't, so I won't. When they say justice, you break that word in half and it's just us. We can't get that in a court system. We can't get a fair discussion even. It's as if we're flora and fauna when we walk in a courtroom. Or like we're terra nullius when we walk in a courtroom. The seats are empty where we're sitting. They don't see us, talk about us as if we're not there. Like the Treaty of Paris of when was it? 1770, 68, somewhere in there. I'm not too keen on that Treaty of Paris, but when the British got sent away from our house by the Americans, they came up with a Treaty of Paris and gave our land away. It's just so unfair. And to think we spent all those years educating them in our house on how to live and how to conduct themselves, starting off with this explanation of how to love your mother. She's tending to you. Who needs an explanation of how to love your mother? Well, these people came and they left all their ancestors behind and never had an attempt in their life to go back and visit them. They're still buried over there in Europe somewheres. These people came here and just walked away from their ancestors, their life. And then come here and diligently try to control ours with a few minor successes. And so, like what Andy said earlier, we're not done. We're not finished. We're still carrying on. And we're still sharing. We're still sharing this good message. Peace and contentment. There's a lot to learn and there's a lot to do. No matter how old you become, you're still learning. The guy in Gona, there's no expiration date on it. There's no expiration date on the Constitution. It does not expire. So these agreements that we have with the colonizing governments, there's no expiration date on the treaties either. So why is it that the supreme law of the land, the door has been closed for honoring the United States' word? You see, there's a lot of strife and a lot of trouble going on in this today because of the previous election, that I'm not even going to get into any of that, except for one little part. It ain't no different than George Washington, Onondaga. It's just now the rest of the world is feeling what we've been through and been going through just about every election. Every 4 years, we had some people will tell us, well, this guy's good. Next 4 years, that guy's better. Well, we don't vote. And that was a problem after they found out they couldn't get rid of us. It was a problem for the Americans that we don't vote. And so they passed the law back in 1924, 1925, Citizenship Act. just threw a blanket over there. All indigenous people are citizens of the United States with the same rights to vote. Well, our council at Onondaga quickly drafted up a letter and said, thank you, but no thank you. We'll remain who we are. I think it was Calvin Coolidge was the president. 1924, 1925. And so our struggle carries on. It doesn't get any easier. There isn't any fairness. We have friends. When we came across, how much time do we have? I don't take up all you guys' time either. Someone will show me. Because it goes back to, let's see, where is he? The original agreement when we first met. And you heard about the paddle that we did from Onondaga Nation, Onondaga Creek, down to New York City. The 400th anniversary of this one. Kaswenta Tigini di Ohahage. Two-row. The two-row agreement that we came up with the traders that were making themselves comfortable longer than we expected. And once we noticed that, when we talk about you have your own council fire, you have your own council fire at each nation, and they tend to their matters. Whatever happens, good, bad, indifferent, whatever the situation may be, they have council. And so anything that affects the neighboring nation becomes all of our responsibility to help resolve or discuss it or celebrate, whatever the matter may be. If it spills into the doors, into the house, it's one house, long house. The law is that they make their own decisions for their own matters in their own nation, as each one does. One spills into the other nation, it becomes all of our matters, and we have a grand council, and we send runners out, which we still do today. We send a runner out there with a message. Your presence is being requested at firekeepers at the Capitol, Haiwhagai'i. And so we come up with this agreement because we noticed that these people in the Mohawk house, Mohawk room, we see that around two different places, different hotels. You got the Onondaga room, you got the Mohawk room. So they're taking all our ideas, and which is okay if they use it properly. Just like when we start off, the introduction, Haiwhagai'i is my real name. And so now, over the years, you hear us talking about that. My real name is Haiwhagai'i. Now the U.S. government's coming up with a real ID for the rest of you guys. And it's okay if they're going to copy us. But stop the punishment. Enjoy the peace. And I know this message isn't for you guys. So many familiar faces that are doing such good work. But we have to get that out there. We have to get that message out there. And so this agreement that came about once the Mohawks helped these Dutch people establish their position on land from their boat. The report that we got was these people, you know, they're like us, kind of. They got hands, fingers. They explained their body that, and they said, but they're kind of odd looking. And they act funny. Because when they got off the boat, they whipped out their knife and start cutting down berry bushes. And to cut down berry bushes, it's not our responsibility to end the life of that or anything. And so that's what the strange part about it is, because when you talk about the Ganohanyu and the translations of the Ganohanyu, if we went to the fine details of it, you would be hearing about the responsibilities of the berries and the nourishment that it brings to not just us. But then you get into it, you come of one mind and you give a thanksgiving for the berries, and you get into the birds, and then you'll hear the description of the birds' responsibilities, and one of them is to take those seeds and deliver it to their next communities, to the next peoples that may be needing them. There's nothing in the Ganohanyu that says about how to chop these things down to make room, because there's enough room in the house. And we understand that, and we understood that. And so they start gathering pelts and hunting and trapping and putting it on their ships and sending them out, and they made themselves comfortable. They built themselves a home, and then they start hunting and trapping further into the woods. And then the Oneidas recognized that these people are in our house, hey? So anyways, a Grand Council was commissioned because now it interfered with the Oneidas next door to the Mohawks, that these hunters were coming in, guys that look funny. And so Grand Council came up with an agreement, or came up with the meeting. At the meeting, they said, we see they're not going home. Maybe they don't know their way home. And if they're going to stay here, then we should have this agreement, which is the two-row wampum, considered the foundation of treaty making. One row represents them and their boat, their religions, their songs, their swords, their way of life. The other row represents us and our canoe and our ceremonies and our way of life and the way we dress. And we agreed in 1613 that we could live side by each, traveling the river of life, not to cross paths with each other. So the boat agrees to not pass laws on to us, and we agree not to pass laws on to them, but to live in our house in peace and contentment under the laws of nature, under the laws of the Gaina Satgona. And in that Gaina Satgona, there is some disciplinary action. I suppose any government would have to have that for their misfits and bad guys. What did they call that? New York State. George Washington called it, let's see, I got George Washington right here in the bag. That's George Washington's here. This is his agreement. Now we're skipping again. We're jumping ahead a couple paragraphs. But here, is the George Washington belt. Sometimes it's referred to as, but it's also the Pickering Treaty. And it's known by our peoples, and at that time also, Canandaigua Treaty of 1794, November 11, where Washington, as the first president of the United States, had summoned us to peace so that we didn't join forces on what was going on around us, which is a whole bunch of another history there. Now you get into all of that stuff there, and it's going to take more than tapping the watch to end it. And so this is the Onondaga Treaty, and it represents the 13 colonies. And also it represents, we come together as one house. So if you look at the house in the middle, one is the White House, and one is the Long House, but they're combined as one. And you got the keepers of the Eastern Door, which is the Mohawk Nation, and you got the keepers of the Western Door, which is the Seneca Nation. And that we'll be at peace, undisturbed in our lands. In our lands that come from, it's somewhere near the proclamation line of Fort Stanwix. It's reiterating the boundaries of Fort Stanwix of 1784, 10 years earlier, which are following the boundary lines of the proclamation line of 1763 with Sir William, one of them guys down there. I don't know if it was Sir William Johnson or his uncle, Guy Johnson. Well, anyways, there's a lot of history that you guys are going to miss out on because the clock's ticking. But as we know, the more we share this information, the more that it gets shared from the people who aren't here, which will draw interest. And that's what this series is about. We have another series coming up I was just informed of, and I don't know what the topics are going to be, but I do understand that the oral teachings, some of you have heard some of this before. I know my people have, and it doesn't harm, it actually polishes the knowledge chambers. Like they said a long time ago when we first met about the chain, covenant chain, peace, friendship, and forever. That's in here too. Peace, friendship, and forever. And we talk about this as this is going to be in effect for as long as the sun shines from the east and sets in the west, for as long as the grass grows green, and for as long as water flows downhill. And we all agreed to that. So that means forever. And so we look forward to the people of America and any of the Caucasian immigrants that come in and making rules on our land to first consult with us, because that's what they didn't do after they got their foothold and started overpopulating our rooms. There's a fairness that we're looking for. There's a justice that we're looking for. And when we find it, we'll share that with you guys all across the world again, because it's not ours to keep to ourselves. It's not a personal property. Peace and contentment is not a personal property. It only grows the more you share. Donato. Have your Apple back.
You can have your computer back. All right. How's this working? Okay. So tonight commemorates the 20th anniversary of the Land Rights Action, but a couple other important commemorations are coming up. This year is the 200th anniversary of the Erie Canal, and that's being commemorated by New York State, celebrated in fact, but the Erie Canal, as we know, was traumatic for the Haudenosaunee and for a variety of other people, but it led directly to the dispossession of the Haudenosaunee. So look forward to some events in the fall around the time of the Erie Canal commemoration. Next year, of course, is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's unlikely that will celebrate the Haudenosaunee contributions to American democracy. So we're going to be also kind of highlighting that history as well, probably in the spring of '26. So again, teasers for the future. So next we get to hear from Jeanne Shenandoah, who is a member of the Eel Clan, a citizen of the Onondaga Nation. She is a traditional medicine keeper and a member of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force. This year, she's a visiting faculty member at SUNY ESF. She spent decades working to reclaim nation lands and has said that they will never give up hope. This is reflected in a recent quote of hers that I really liked. "We, the Onondagas, are here, and we have never not been here. People don't realize that. And that's why that acknowledgement is so important." So please welcome Jeanne Shenandoah. Stay there. It should be on. It should be on.
Try it.
It's on? Yeah. Hello, everybody. I don't know what to say after all that. He said everything. Well, most of you know me, Jeanne Shenandoah. I am Eel Clan, Onondaga, Okundena, Eel Clan woman. I have spent most of my life involved with the issues of my people. I can't ever say when I started because it's always been there, all these issues of our homelands and our behaviors and the constant I don't want to say struggle, part of it's a struggle, but the constant pleasure in living in who we are and maintaining our identity, our ways of life. But so part of that is, I guess, very early in my lifetime, I remember the elders were always speaking. I was fortunate to live a life that was surrounded by many elderly people that were active politically and spiritually, most of all. The most thing is must be strength, have our spiritual strength for us to continue in this maintaining who we are. So I was fortunate to learn at an early age and hear the teaching of our homelands here, the homelands that we all live on here now. That's always been our homeland, and it still is. I don't agree with the word land back, because I've always grown up with the thought that that's just always our home. It's never stopped being our home. We might not have the actual physical possession, because most of our of the property was taken from us through illegal way is illegal and evil and all kinds of chicanery things, you name it, it was done to us to remove us from our beautiful homeland here. But we still to this day, it is our homeland. Never has been anything else. So that's why I don't agree with the word land back, because it's always been our home. All the whole territory where our people lived, from the Thousand Islands down to what's now Pennsylvania, and maybe even further. Anyway, so I grew up in a family that was always very politically active and vocal, so that it just came kind of was how my life was, I guess. So I don't know when I started or anything. But I should say that a large part of my life has been actively regaining different portions of our homeland into back to our possession. This land rights action we're celebrating right now, that 20 years of where did it get us, what we've been through. We've been through a lot of struggle. But I also want to say that even though this is the 20th year of our filing the land rights action, it started far, far before that. Like I said, I've been able to hear about this all of our lifetime. Our elders, my family, Jake's family, they've always been talking about it. So it wasn't something that just started then. But then when the more movement came, it took a lot of people to get us to the point where we would file for the land rights. And I should say at this point that forever, ever, always be thankful for the people that formed the Noon organization and did a lot of work to help us, to assist us and support us. We had to spend a lot of time going around this whole area of central New York area, north, south, all directions, to go and talk to people, different civil organizations, different whoever would listen to us. We went there and told them what our intent was, and to reassure them that we were intending to only for recognition of our homeland, of where our people had always been, where all the memories of our people, the ceremonies, the sacred places. There are so many people that have places that have names in their sacred places, where our people went and had ceremonies. And so to talk about all this constantly and tell people about our lives here, and talk about the lake, why this lake that sits over here is so precious to us, our heart and our soul, that we go there and give thanks regardless of all the damage that's been done to it and mistreated. So it took a lot of talking and a lot of time to travel around to hopefully get people to understand what we were doing and know about us, because even though we are here, we live just a close ways here. There are people in this area that didn't even know that we exist. To this day, there are many people that don't know that we're here. So we spend a lot of our portion of our time, I guess, maybe not explaining ourselves, but also letting people know of our presence here. Our presence and letting people know about the teachings of our people, how we're people of peace and justice, equality, people that live under humility and help each other, sharing and caring. Share these teachings with people so that they would understand who we are and be supportive of us. And we have gained a lot of support in this area, and actually all over the world, because many of our people have traveled out and shared our teachings with people. Many different countries. Our people went to the United Nations to help people understand us and our situation. So our reputations has carried far, and we do everything we can to live to the teachings that we talk about. So we're not just talking about it, but we're living it. We're living it and being appreciative of life and everything around us, and protective of it. Like I mentioned, the lake is so beautiful to this day, but you don't dare stick your foot in it. Those are the things that we've had to put up forever and talk to a whole bunch of liars. Excuse me. People that lied to us and tell us dishonest things to our face and think we're going to sit there and believe it. That's what we have to do. We live our life on our own territory, which is a sovereign territory, because we've always been there. We are not part of the New York State. We're not part of the United States. We are Haudenosaunee, our own people. We live in our own community, the heartbeat of our confederacy. That's where we live, and that's who we are. We're part of the earth. And the thing that has to be constant throughout all of our history, the people that passed on before us, our spiritual leaders and political leaders that constantly had to daily be conscious of maintaining this and protecting us. So we're really fortunate to have a history like that, and it's been many years that we filed that Land Rights Action. Some of us are starting to get a little old. Yeah, it gets real tiring after a while doing this, but it means so much to us that I guess we don't really appreciate the tiredness, but just keeping each other going all the time, and always having words of prayer or words of thanksgiving. We give thanks for everything, like Tato Daho just did before us to open this, to give thanks for everything around us. And that's what gives us a good strength and maintains who we are. So as a result of that, all that energy that we put into the preparing for the Land Rights Action before it even happened, traveling to different communities and talking with different organizations or clubs or whoever wanted to hear us, we gained a lot of friends, and we learned a lot of things by talking with people. And people learned a lot about us and started hearing more of our words of peace and caring for the earth, the respect that we have, and the thankfulness for all the water and the air and everything around us. So what happened, I think it happened even before we actually filed the action. People from all directions started coming to us with their situations in their communities, in their homes, where they had feelings of helpfulness, of hope. No hope because of the situations they had to live in, different places where there was pollution and illegal land things happening, gravel mines, dumps, all kinds of toxic situations. So all these different people started coming and approaching us and telling us about their situations, looking for help, because they hadn't been able to find any help within their own type of government that they were having a hard time believing in, because nothing was happening to help them. So I guess that's the main thing, is just what we've been going through, and it hasn't stopped. And we're not done. We're still constantly finding ways to share our teachings with people, to help people to get to some kind of justice in environment. I also belong to the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force, and we constantly have a whole pile of stuff on our table by helping ourselves and helping other people, and different actions to care for the environment, the pollutions and things that are going on around us by people that are so careless and have no regard because of their greed and selfishness and disregard of the beauty of this place we live in. Because we truly, right here in this area, live in one of the most beautiful places on earth. I think everybody can share that with me. I truly am very happy. I love where I live. And we should all have that feeling. We should all share that. Be happy where we are and appreciate what's around us, the beautiful landscape. But we have to also be aware that we constantly have to be defending it and striving for justice for the land. So I don't have a whole lot more to say.
1,000 acres.
Oh, yeah, but that wasn't part of it. Well, we did get some land returned to us recently. It was not part of the Land Rights Action at the time, but and a good example of perseverance and patience, and sitting back and listening to all kinds of lies and injustices, and observing all the damages that were done to different parts of the earth here by these disgusting multinational corporations that were dumping their stuff wherever they wanted to. So we went through this for a long time, settling what had been a lawsuit that was filed. And through that lawsuit, there was a decision that was made that would return some acres to us. And believe me, boy, they put us through hell to get to the point where we would accept it. Pardon the language. But so fairly recently, we have 1,000 of acres of property returned to our possession. But that also took a lot of work, a lot of help from many, many people to get to the point where it officially was signed over to us. And we had to jump through a lot of hoops. So now we have this property, and we have to defend it, because right beside it is a gravel pit, which is hoping to enlarge itself, which is a big danger to the water, to the land, to the people around it. This 1,000 acres is, for the most part, is pristine. There's fresh water coming out of the earth. It's somewhat it's beautiful. It's been used a little bit in the past, but for this part, there are some beautiful, beautiful places there, and we hope to develop some kind of a plan to steward the property. We've had a tremendous amount of support from some students from the Environmental Science and Forestry College have come in and done evaluations of different things for us, evaluations of the wetlands, the water, the plants. So we're off to a pretty good start on that. And then hopefully we'll move on to do some things to appreciate it and keep it clean and fresh, protect it. Is that it? So anyways, I'm not very good on timelines or anything, but we have been really busy for these last years since that time. There are so many things that we have had to be doing and keeping active that that Joe's going to tell you. Yes, one more thing. Is that still on?
Yeah?
One more thing is I have to say great appreciation to so many people that have stuck by us, supported us, and become our good friends, our very, very good friends. We've developed a lot of friendship, and let me tell you that we all truly appreciate it very much. Thank you so much, all you people that believe in us and support us. And I have to say one other very special thank you to Joe. This guy. He's been with us through thick and thin for a long time. Started out when he was a young guy, and now look at him. We're starting to get old, so we gotta. I don't want to tell you. Okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you. So the slideshow running behind us is just a few things that have been going on for over 20 years. This is just a smattering of things. We could add to it, of course. But I just wanted to acknowledge all of the friendships, as Jeannie was mentioning, all of the friendships that have developed over this time around these issues of urgent mutual concern. With that, I'd like to introduce Joe. Joe Heath has been General Counsel for the Onondaga Nation since 1982 and an attorney since 1975. I hate to be the bearer of that news. For the nation, his work centers on environmental protection, particularly under the Clean Water Act, focusing on Onondaga Lake and Onondaga Creek, archaeologic site and unmarked burial site protection, Native American graves protection, and Repatriation Act, repatriation and litigation, Indian Child Welfare Act litigation, hunting and fishing rights, treaty rights, excise tax issues, and land rights. Joe's researched the issues of fracking and shared his knowledge of the many different environmental dangers created by fracking with community groups for 6 years. For 4 of those years, he also educated landowners on how to terminate their leases and manage the many questionable ways gas companies are seeking to extend old leases, and he spoke to landowners directly in over 40 towns. In addition to these current areas of work, Joe has extensive experience in civil rights litigation as one of the 4 lawyers who represented the class action against New York State for the 1971 Attica prison assault and brutality, criminal defense, constitutional law and protection of free speech and assembly, protection of abused and neglected children, and fighting domestic violence. Joe is also an active member of Veterans for Peace. Thank you. Give Joe a...
Parking ticket, though.
Can't fix parking tickets. All right. You all set?
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming, and all of the people that worked so hard to pull this evening together. And I need to thank Jeannie for those kind words. So we're here to reflect on the last 20 years. I remember the details of that day. So tomorrow's March 11th. 20 years ago tomorrow, we filed the Land Rights Action in federal court here in Syracuse. And it may sound a little weird for a lawyer to say that a case that got treated so shamefully and dismissed before the ink was dry almost, but a great deal has been accomplished over those 20 years. And I hope to reflect on some of that with you. But it's also important to remember what both Jake and Jeannie said. This is just the latest chapter of the nation and the people fighting for 2.5 centuries to reclaim their stolen land and water. Because they started right after New York originally stole the first chunk of land and have never stopped. And they have worked tirelessly to fulfill their cultural and spiritual obligations and to be stewards of the land. But really, we have to think back 1,000 years, as Jake said, to the formation of the Confederacy. Most of us are familiar with Faith Keeper Ron Lyon's painting that depicts the formation of the Confederacy on the Sacred Lake, also known as the most polluted lake in the country, thanks to colonization. Because before colonization, the Haudenosaunee and the Onondagas were stewards of millions of acres. This is a map we used at the beginning of the Land Rights Action that shows approximately the area that the Onondagas were stewards of for thousands of years. And those of you that know this area, I don't know what, no, can't do that. It's the whole eastern shore of Lake Ontario. Hundreds of streams and rivers, some of the Thousand Islands, probably tens of thousands of places to fish within that 2.5 million acres. 1/3 of the diet of the Onondagas and the Haudenosaunee people was fish. All of that gone, stolen, polluted. Onondaga Lake was so full of fish when the colonists first started coming up in the middle 1700s that each of them wrote about the quantity and quality of fish in that lake. Gone. The fish are completely inedible, and more has been stolen from them over the years. The waters were all pristine, abundant fish and game. That's what Onondaga and Haudenosaunee stewardship saves and preserves, as compared to what we see going on. We'll get back to what's going on in a minute. But all of those fishing spots have been stolen, trashed. And we need to think back. This is a map from 1776, just before the beginning of the Revolutionary War. All of the settlements were way over to the east. There were no settlements to the west of Schenectady. Every map of that era labels land of the Six Nations. That's what was there after the Revolutionary War, after the 1779 Sullivan-Clinton reign of terror. This is what New York did to the land. chopped it up and commodified it and broke it up into what they call the military tracts, so that each one of these little chunks could be used for profit. And that's what happened. On one hand, they claim, oh, we had to pay the soldiers. Well, history tells us that most of the soldiers, particularly the enlisted men, didn't get any land, and that their rights to this land that New York was going to hand out were taken by land speculators, who then sold the land for 5 to 10 times as much as they got it. This is a new book that I highly recommend, because in order to understand the theft of all of the indigenous land on Turtle Island, we must understand the horrible concept of land speculation. Every one of the founding fathers was a land speculator. There were two ways to make money in the early republic: slavery and land speculation. And particularly the landed families in Virginia were into the land speculation up to their teeth. Washington, Jefferson, Franklin. Washington, before, around the time of what is improperly called the French and Indian War, because that's really just an adjunct of the 7 Years' War that the colonists were fighting in Europe. But at the time, flipping Indian land was the second major source of wealth. And so the landed families in Virginia were buying the rights to indigenous land on the west of the Appalachians, where nations were still living, not even knowing that these colonists are coming after them, and saying that we now control the land and we have a right to sell it. That's what happened in land speculation. These are just two of the quotes from the jacket cover of this new book, which I really think people need to understand. During the first quarter century after its founding, the United States was swept by a wave of land speculation so unprecedented in its intensity and scale that contemporaries and historians alike have dubbed it a mania. Patriotic leaders stake the success of their revolution on the seizure and public sale of Native American territory. We must remember how integral that is to what we now call the United States. And as Jake shared with us, the Haudenosaunee are always engaged in diplomacy from the first contact with the Dutch in 1613. So let's think back to 2005 and what was the Land Rights Action about? In the late 1990s, we had had 3 or 4 years of relatively constant discussions with the state of New York. This was under Governor Pataki, believe it or not. Those discussions broke apart because they walked away from them, something we're awfully familiar with. But Chief Irving Powers Jr. was told by the aide to the governor, looks like you got a really strong case there, Irv, but we can't talk to you about it until you take it to court. And then they fought it tooth and nail. The nation was clear that it was a land rights action, not a land claim. Never intending to remove someone who did not want to get rid of their land, not intending to take land away from the settlers, because they knew what it is like to have the land taken out from under you. So it was no threat to the neighbors. We worked under that first paragraph that Phil read, which, by the way, was dictated to us in the Longhouse. We thought we had the perfect federal complaint, and we were told, no, you've left out this key cultural aspect. And that's how the first paragraph was created. So we filed a land rights action in the Northern District at federal court here, charging New York State with illegally taking the land in violation of 3 treaties, the Constitution and the 1790 Trade and Intercourse Act, but the case always had a strong environmental focus as well. We sued Honeywell, we sued 2 different gravel mine owners, and the largest air polluter in Salve. That's what we filed 20 years ago tomorrow. But I've always understood that the legal work has only been a very small part of the Onondaga's centuries of tireless efforts to regain their lands and their water and to exercise their stewardship and to rely on their diplomacy. And they've been working the last 20 years cooperatively with neighbors on a slew of environmental protection projects, working with other governments to secure more respect and acceptance and understanding of traditional ecological knowledge, traditional knowledge and culture. The nation engaged in many cooperative efforts. We heard a little bit about fracking, the largest grassroots movement in this state in a century. Onondaga was a leader. When there were rallies in Albany, Taradaho and others opened those rallies because the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force and the nation understood so much quicker than so many of the environmentalists that we had to educate the horrendous danger presented by fracking. HETF was the first group to call for a complete ban of fracking. And that changed the entire struggle of resistance because everybody else was tiptoeing around and saying, oh, we can regulate it. You can't regulate fracking. And so HETF and Onondaga were keys in that struggle. We've certainly been fighting long enough. A lot of people from here went to protect Seneca Lake when there was this horrible idea of storing massive amounts of propane in abandoned solution salt caverns underneath the lake. You can't make this stuff up. And of course, we will continue to fight to restore and clean up Onondaga Lake and to protect and restore Onondaga Creek and to help spread the understanding and awareness of traditional ecological knowledge. So in these 20 years, so much has been accomplished with positive results, even though the courts were so shameful. We have 1,000 acres back, as Jeannie mentioned. We can talk about that if there's time. We've had much better relations with our neighbors, better relations with some people in the federal and state government, maybe not the federal government anymore. But there's so much more to be done. So, back in 2005, we filed the case on March 11th. 18 days later, the Sherrill decision came flushing out of the Supreme Court. I remember reading that decision on a fax in Tarky's sister's house in Arizona, and as soon as you read it, you knew that's the end of the Haudenosaunee land rights, right there. It wasn't directly the end. In that situation, Oneida had been buying back stolen land within their Canandaigua reservation. And after that, they said, we're not paying your taxes or complying with your jurisdiction and zoning. So the city of Sherrill took them to court. Oneida won in the district court and the Second Circuit, and then it goes up to the Supremes. And the great liberal Ruth Bader Ginsburg authored an 8-1 decision that said, no, you can't reestablish your jurisdiction that way. It's not fair, she wrote. Not fair. All of what we're going to talk about for the next couple of minutes is labeled equity. Well, that's not equity as I know it. So, the Sherrill decision and Johnson versus McIntosh are built upon and based upon the doctrine of Christian discovery and domination, which is founded on papal bulls issued in the 1400s and 1500s to justify European colonialism and plunder of Africa first. And then after Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean, the Pope issued another papal bull the year after, in 1493. And essentially what it says is that when a Christian nation discovers land, it's a weird term for a place where people have been living for thousands of years, but that's the arrogance of this doctrine. So that when a Christian nation discovers the land not ruled by Europeans and Christians, the title or ownership and jurisdiction of those lands immediately transfers to the colonial government, merely by planting their flag. And indigenous people are left only with a right of occupancy, which can be ended at will by the United States under a completely illegal claim of power called plenary power. That's a short version of the doctrine of Christian discovery. The first time that it was brought into U.S. law was 202 years ago in 1823 in Johnson versus McIntosh. And this is where John Marshall, who himself was a notorious land speculator, took a case that had been concocted with the parties colluding to pay each other's lawyers and bring it up to Marshall so he could bring this decision together. And there he said, the indigenous rights to complete sovereignty as independent nations was necessarily diminished by the mere discovery, by the original fundamental principle that discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it. The different nations of Europe asserted the ultimate dominion, and again, Steve Newcomb has taught us the importance of the dominion. You really need to understand dominion and domination when you're thinking about colonialism. And as a consequence of that ultimate dominion, dominion, easy for me to say, the power to grant the soil yet in possession of the natives. John Marshall could have written a decision on this matter in about 5 pages. Instead, he goes on to close to 50 because he's got to backfill and justify it, because he admits, however extravagant the pretension of converting the discovery of inhabited country into conquest may appear. So he admits that this is absurd. If the principle has been inserted in the first instance and afterwards sustained, and if the country has been acquired and held under it, and the property of a great deal of the masses of the community originate from it, it becomes the law of the land and cannot be questioned. So Ginsburg cites back to Johnson versus McIntosh in the first footnote in Sherrill, where she says, under the doctrine of discovery, right there in a footnote in 2005, the doctrine of discovery, fee title held by the Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nations and then the original United States. The rest, there's a sentence at the end of that footnote that's really pretty astonishing, because both before and after the adoption of the Constitution, she admits that New York acquired vast tracts of land from Indian nations through treaties it independently negotiated without international participation. That is a clear violation of the Trade and Intercourse Act and the Constitution. She admits it and then goes on to say, none of that matters. It's not fair for Indians to try to re-establish their jurisdiction. So that's 18 days after our case is filed. The Second Circuit then uses Sherrill to dismiss the Cayuga land claim at that time. the only award that the Cayugas carried from the district court to the Second Circuit was money, a $250 million judgment that Judge McCarran and the jury had finally given them. How is that disruptive? And yet, without batting an eye, the Second Circuit said, oh no, Cheryl says we have to throw this out, you're dismissed. Oneida, which had been pending 40 years at that time, and 2010 was thrown out. Our case was dismissed in the district court when we only had one appearance before it was dismissed. And I got to argue that dismissal in the Second Circuit on Columbus Day. In 2012, they gave us 10 minutes, and 1 week later, dismissed our case. But that exhausted our domestic remedy. That's the term that's used. And after being so shamefully treated by the U.S. courts, the nation filed a petition in the Organization of American States Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, charging the United States with 3 human rights violations: allowing the land to be stolen, allowing the land to be polluted, and for having a court system that gives no remedy for treaty violations. All of this based upon the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the American Declaration. Last May, our petition reached a milestone. It's the first Indian nation to get this far against the United States in any international forum, because the Commission issued a letter acknowledging that our case was admissible, the term used in this weird forum. And what that means is that it survived a motion to dismiss and will now be decided on the merits. And no other nation has gone that far. The United States have been a bit cavalier about it. In fact, they missed the chance to file a brief after this admissibility decision, which is something I've never understood. When you have a chance to file in any court, you file. But they don't really care about this. One of their defenses is, it's not binding. It doesn't matter what you say, we'll ignore it, as they did to the Dan sisters and the Western Shoshone when the Dan sisters got their decision against the United States. And they also said, we take care of Indian land just great. There's no problem here, nothing to look at. We have the trust system. Yeah, okay. And all of this is too old. You shouldn't be allowing them to bring it up again. So this is a very, very important political step for the nation to continue to fight as they have for the 2.5 centuries. It is a moral victory that is very important. It also shows how shameful the U.S. colonial courts were. So the other major achievement, I'm probably running out of time, so I'll go through this quickly. Last September, the nation secured the title to 1,000 acres in the upper Tully Valley. It contains the headwaters of Onondaga Creek. And in my view, it is really an extension of the Land Rights Action, because what we learned, as it took us 4 years to get the state and federal government to understand that the land had to be given back with jurisdiction in the nation, we learned that at least 2 women in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were so offended by what was going on out on the lake and how the nation was being ignored out there, that they helped define this one project, that's what they call what they made Honeywell do, and that it was their intention that it go to the nation. Before we even began to be authorized to talk about how to get it back. There are probably 3-4 dozen tributaries that form the creek in this territory. Tully Valley is, excuse me, often described as a dry finger lake by geologists. And when you see some of these waterfalls, you understand why. There are 6 waterfalls. And most importantly, there are still some brook trout in those streams. Brook trout are the native trout in New York. The state likes to push them out and put brown trout in because brown will tolerate more pollution and temperature problems. But brook trout still are in the headwaters. We have formed a brook trout restoration project with the Forestry School and the Center for Indigenous Studies in the Environment, and we are working to bring back brook trout. And the reason that that's important is that it will give the Onondaga people a place to fish, which they no longer have because the creek that flows through their currently recognized territory is so polluted by Honeywell and the mud boils, which they caused with their reckless solution salt mining, that there's no longer any fish in there. But the elders at Onondaga remember what that creek was like before it was destroyed by Honeywell. This is a picture of Irving Paulus Sr. This trout is 24 3/4 inches, 5.5 pounds, taken out of Onondaga Creek on the currently recognized territory. That's what was in that creek prior to the ruin and all the damage and destruction done by Honeywell. And so someday, that's Irving Jr.'s father, but his great-grandchildren will have a place to fish. So, as everyone has said, and as we all know, there's a lot of work to do. First of all, the lake is still, I think, the most polluted in the country. We just heard about them finding free mercury under one of the factory sites in Solvay. We're trying to look into that more. But even after the gains that I've talked about, the fact that Onondaga is supported by so many of you and your neighbors, the 1,000 acres back, the OAS work, we can't stop. We must keep working as the Onondagas will do, no matter, as they have forever. Because we have to get land back on Onondaga Lake. The county made a promise to do that in 2011. They can't remember how to keep their promise. The colonial Columbus Monument still sits in the center of our city. And the center of Syracuse is clearly within the Canandaigua treaty-protected Onondaga Reservation. All of the city is within the reservation under the rules handed down in the McGirt decision in 2020. That's what Congress created when it ratified Canandaigua. It has done nothing to shrink it. That is still a reservation. We are standing on the Onondaga Reservation. Well, I'm the only one standing, but... And as I said, we will continue to work towards restoration of the brook trout. We have 2 other species we're already working to preserve out on 1,000 acres. One, an endangered snail, One, we're trying to figure out whether or not a freshwater mussel that lives in streams is there and can be preserved and restored. And as Jeanne mentioned, there is a gravel mine in Tully that is trying to expand, that we must work together. The nation joined the citizens of Tully in the late 90s to try to stop that gravel mine. We may have the political alignments in place to be able to stop that expansion after all of these years. We actually have the State Attorney General's office talking to us about it. Federal scientists approached me and said, don't let them expand that gravel mine. So that's something that you'll be hearing more about as we move forward. The nation is also very much involved in the Micron project, which could be an environmental disaster. It will use massive amounts of water, larger than the city of Syracuse. The use of that water in the chip manufacturing process is to repeatedly wash chemicals off the chips. Those chemicals are the forever chemicals, PFAS, hundreds of them. Half of them, Micron won't even know what they are because their subcontractors claim that they're secret. You can't remove PFAS, certainly not from a county water plant, and then they're going to dump that water into the Seneca River. That's the current plan. They're also going to use more electricity than the city, and there's no real plan for how to provide that electricity through alternative generations. And in fact, what we're going to see, what we're already seeing, is they're going to say the nukes up in Oswego, which were being built when I was in high school, which makes them well beyond any lifespan, we'll just keep the ratepayers propping up those nukes so we can keep this factory going. We have to hold them to environmental standards. But more broadly, we all know that we just entered a very, very dangerous stage with a maniac in the White House and a guy named Muskrat running around tearing up the federal government. So we must continue to work together to resist the current dismantling of environmental protections. Funding for critical environmental programs is already gone. Offices are being closed. Big oil and big gas and big coal now run the government. At a time when the earth is at a tipping point, we have this insanity going on. I know you all know this. So we must fight even harder to reject this systematic white supremacy and to fight even harder for justice and equal opportunity for all. It's time for justice, time for healing, time for peace. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Are we going to close out? Do we close? Okay. So I think we'll just go to the closing. We're a little over time. After we're finished here, there's, I think, soup and scones prepared by Tina Thomas and Earl Fish. So please enjoy yourself out in the lobby, and I'll hand it back to Tadadao.
So we always end our gatherings and our meetings, ceremonies, kind of a short closing, acknowledging the things that Creator give to us, and that we're finished for tonight. And we mentioned the 4 protectors who watch over us, and we asked them that we make sure that all the people that are here get back safely to our homes, and that we're set free for the night to go back to our families. Danita.